They say every neighborhood has its quirks. Some have nosy neighbors, others have loose raccoons. Mine, I have Vera Langston, who makes raccoons look polite. Some people break into homes to steal jewelry. My neighbor broke in and stole a face full of skunk spray. In mating season, if you're eating, maybe pause this. And if you're watching from your basement right now, blink twice and drop your location in the comments for help. I'm Reed Maddox, and 6 months ago I moved to Cedar Creek Estates. A neighborhood so pristine it could have been designed by a toothpaste company's marketing team. Manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, American flags placed exactly 30 inches from every front porch, and an HOA so involved it felt less like a community and more like a low-budget dictatorship. I came for peace, proximity to the nature preserve, and a little quiet to edit my wildlife footage. What I got instead was Vera Langston, president of the HOA and self-proclaimed sheriff of suburbia. Vera greeted me on move-in day like she'd just caught me urinating on her begonias. She marched over in orthopedic sneakers and handed me a laminated copy of the HOA rulebook, 71 pages thick and somehow heavier than my camera gear. Sections 4 through 9 are non-negotiable, she said, smiling like a fox who's already licked the chicken. I thought she was joking. Turns out she was dead serious. The bird feeder I'd hung up? Too ornate. The solar lights on my path? Wrong color temperature. My trash bin placement? A threat to community harmony. Vera had the warmth of a parking ticket and the patience of a smoke alarm at 3 a.m. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but every time I blinked there was another friendly reminder taped to my door. By week 2, I started to wonder if she was training a hawk to deliver citations from above. Now, I've dealt with wild creatures my whole career. I worked for the National Park Service before going freelance as a wildlife photographer and conservation YouTuber. I've camped with grizzlies, tracked cougars, and once got chased by an angry family of porcupines. But none of them prepared me for the sharp claws of suburban politics. Vera ran the HOA like it was a Fortune 500 company in a crisis. She had a clicky pen, a clipboard, and an army of middle-aged volunteers who seemed to think measuring lawn height was a patriotic duty. And yet, her personal life? Total chaos. Rumor had it she used to work in real estate development before getting canned for manipulating environmental reports. Her ex-husbands, plural, left like they were escaping a cult. Now she channels all that energy into the one place where she can't be fired, the HOA board. I tried to keep my head down, figured I'd lay low, be the harmless wildlife guy, and stay out of Vera's sniper scope, but control junkies like Vera don't tolerate unpredictability. And what's more unpredictable than a man who speaks fluent owl and keeps frozen mice in his garage freezer? I wasn't even doing anything that unusual, just setting up my basement with a state-permitted wildlife recovery area in case I found injured animals during hikes. But the moment I started building a small native garden in my yard, well within local environmental guidelines, Vera materialized like she'd been summoned by the scent of non-compliance. That soil mix hasn't been HOA tested, she warned me. I wanted to ask what exactly she was testing for. Communism? Instead, I smiled, nodded, and promised to circle back. That's suburban code for no thank you. The thing about neighborhoods like Cedar Creek is they sell you tranquility and deliver theater. Everyone waves, but secretly watches. They smile, but keep score. And Vera? Vera didn't just keep score, she kept dossiers. She knew whose rose bushes were encroaching, who left their recycling bin out past 6 p.m., and who had the audacity to install a wind chime without prior approval. I thought if I just played along, I'd avoid her wrath. But then came the Skunks. A family of them. Injured, reeking, and right under my porch. And because I'm me, and because someone has to care, I brought them inside. That's when Vera lost her mind, and when this story really began. Because, as it turns out, nothing exposes a tyrant faster than a little wildlife and a whole lot of stink. Most people fear robbers. I fear what's under my porch, and, oddly enough, I invited it inside. It started with a soft scratching sound and a pitiful squeak, the kind that punches you straight in the empathy. I was hauling camera gear in after a morning hike when I spotted them. one adult skunk limping badly, followed by two juvenile puffballs moving like they hadn't eaten in days. No hissing, no stamping, just surrender. I stood there with my boots halfway untied, debating whether to call someone or step in, and then I remembered. I am the someone. I scooped them up with a towel, whispered a few promises they couldn't possibly understand, and brought them into my basement, which, I should mention, is less man cave and more temporary wildlife hospital. I've rehabbed foxes, owls, even one extremely entitled raccoon, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for skunks in mating season. Nothing. The first thing I did was call Dr. Elise Romero, my go-to wildlife biologist and fellow stink enthusiast. She arrived in a hoodie and nitrile gloves, took one look at the trio in their makeshift enclosure, and sighed, like someone seeing a tornado form over a barbecue. "That's a female," she said, nodding toward the adult. "And those boys are almost mature. Reed, it's mating season." Her tone dropped half an octave, like she was diagnosing a house with termites and termites with lawyers. Now, I know a thing or two about skunks. I know they don't spray unless they're scared. I know they're highly intelligent, emotionally expressive, and wildly misunderstood, but mating season transforms them into perfumed chaos with feet. Their scent glands go into hyperdrive, and what starts as a gentle, musky warning quickly escalates into call your insurance agent. Elise helped me clean the mother's leg, confirmed the boys were malnourished but stable, and then handed me a spray bottle of industrial enzyme cleaner, like she was passing me a crucifix. The rehab space was ready. I'd prepped it months ago. Temperature control, washable surfaces, negative pressure ventilation system with triple charcoal filters. I even had separate enclosures for species that shouldn't mix. This wasn't some suburban science experiment. This was legal, licensed, and backed by enough paperwork to bury a middle manager. Still, even the best filters can't fully mask nature's signature during mating season. The scent started slow, like a polite suggestion. By day 3, it was curling up the stairs like a ghost with boundary issues. It clung to my shirt, my furniture, my dreams. You know it's bad when your fridge smells like it's judging you. I doubled up on purifiers. I installed a perimeter line of odor-pneumalizing gel pods. I was living in a scented fortress, but you can't outrun a skunk's calling card. Not when 3 of them are tap dancing in your basement like they're auditioning for a funk band. And definitely not when one of them thinks he's Romeo with glands. And that's when she started circling Vera Langston, the HOA's own surveillance drone with lipstick and unresolved trauma. It began innocently enough. Her brisk walk route just happened to shift to include 3 slow passes by my house each day. Then came the gardening sessions in her front yard, strategically positioned to monitor my side gate. I noticed a garden gnome facing my window. I waved. It blinked. Vera had installed a motion-detecting camera inside a ceramic lawn gnome. I'm not making this up. One afternoon, I caught her behind my hydrangeas pretending to measure air humidity with what was clearly a laser thermometer pointed directly at my basement window. I texted Elise. "We've entered the Cold War phase." She replied, "Prepare countermeasures and maybe a fan." Meanwhile, the skunks were thriving. The mother, now affectionately named Miss Butterstripe, had started walking without dragging her leg. The juveniles were bulking up, shedding that sharp-boned look and beginning to play, rolling over each other like chubby black jelly beans with an agenda. I was careful to minimize human interaction. I fed them in silence, wore the same hoodie every time, used scent, numeral gloves. Skunks habituated to humans don't survive in the wild, and I wanted them to leave someday. But between their hormone-fueled antics and Vera's slow descent into HOA espionage, that dream was getting harder to imagine. I caught her peeking over my back fence at dawn. I caught her walking by with a clipboard, whispering into a Bluetooth headset like she was coordinating a sting. The skunks weren't even the most feral thing in my yard anymore. I tried to get ahead of it. Drafted a calm, detailed note explaining what I was doing, listed the permits, even offered to discuss it with the board. Vera didn't respond. Instead, a flurry of violation notices appeared on my door. One claimed unlicensed chemical odor emission. Another cited unauthorized basement activity involving wildlife species not pre-approved by HOA protocols. I hadn't even known that was a checkbox. And the kicker? Community ambiance compromised due to sustained atmospheric discomfort. That one sounded like she'd licked a thesaurus. It was clear she didn't want clarity. She wanted leverage. She wasn't just sniffing around. She was preparing a case. And my basement? It had become her white whale. Only, unlike Captain Ahab, she didn't realize the whale was loaded, hairy, and actively producing musk. She was closing in, and I could feel it. That tension, the kind I'd only felt once before. On a ridgeline in Montana, with a grizzly 10 feet away, and the wind blowing the wrong way. The funny part? I still believed I could fix this, that logic, science, and a little neighborly communication could stop this before it spiraled. But Vera wasn't interested in logic. She was interested in order, her kind of order, the kind where everything's symmetrical, everyone's obedient, and nothing smells like rebellion. And those skunks, they reeked of it. Every twitch of their tail, every puff of scent into my air filters was a tiny declaration of independence. I knew it, Elise knew it. Vera could smell it. The line had been drawn, and it wasn't chalk. It was skunk oil. What none of us knew yet, not even the skunks, was that this smell was only the beginning, because Vera wasn't backing off, and neither was I. The real standoff hadn't even started, but the air? The air was already thick with warning. If you think Vera's done sniffing around, think again. The smell's getting stronger, the violation letters are piling up, and the HOA meeting? Oh, that's going to be one for the history books. You don't want to miss what happens when she brings a projector and I bring receipts. So hit that subscribe button because next up, Vera makes it official. War by HOA. And trust me, the skunks aren't the only ones ready to spray. By week 3, my mailbox had more fines than birthday cards. I missed when spam was just online. Vera had entered her citation symphony phase. Every day a new note, each one signed in a handwriting so sharp it could etch glass. Excessive wildlife proximity. Unauthorized odor presence. Improper use of basement square footage. That last one made me laugh out loud. I half expected the next violation to say, breathing while suspicious. I knew what was happening. This wasn't about the skunks anymore. It was about control. Vera didn't just want order, she needed it. Like oxygen. And the scent creeping out of my basement? That wasn't just musk to her, that was rebellion. And in Vera's HOA kingdom, rebellion gets paper served until it breaks. But I wasn't breaking. I'd faced black bears and bureaucrats. Vera Langston would need more than a clipboard and a collection of clip art borders to shake me. Of course, she wasn't coming alone. Every villain has a sidekick, and Vera had Rod. Mid-50s, mustache that looked like it hadn't moved since the 1980s, and the moral backbone of a wet napkin. Rod wasn't HOA board material, he was HOA wallpaper. He followed Vera like a backup singer in a doo-wop group, nodding at everything she said with the enthusiasm of a Labrador waiting for a treat. I caught him once casually walking past my backyard with a selfie stick pointed suspiciously downward. I waved. He flinched like I'd thrown a wrench. These people weren't trying to solve a problem. They were building a case, and Vera, she was preparing for court. The HOA kind, where logic goes to die and PowerPoints rise from the grave. When the meeting notice came, stamped "U Argent" and decorated with passive-aggressive beige, I knew it was showtime. The Cedar Creek Estates Community Center was a tan cube that smelled like old coffee and ambition. I walked in, with Elise at my side and a manila folder thick with state permits, veterinary reports, and photos of Miss Butterstripe, looking downright majestic. Vera was already seated at the center of a folding table lineup. Rod sat to her left, eyes darting toward her like a nervous intern. Vera stood up and launched into a speech that could only be described as a TED Talk hosted by Vinegar. "Our community thrives on standards," she began. clicking a remote that revealed a blurry image of my basement window. But when one individual decides those standards don't apply to him, we must act. She advanced to the next slide, a pixelated close-up of Miss Butterstripe. The audience collectively leaned back. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Is that a raccoon?" Then it was my turn. I stood up slowly, like a man preparing to step into a courtroom or a very polite ambush. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to clarify." I laid out the timeline: injured wildlife, legally permitted care, the state's endorsement of what I was doing. Elise, calm as a sunrise, backed me up with her credentials and explained that moving skunks during mating season would endanger both them and the community. I even passed around printed copies of the permits, each one stamped with the kind of government seal that makes people shut up and read. You could feel the tension shift. The HOA board members looked at Vera like she'd handed them a skunk in a gift bag. Rod squinted at the papers like he was seeing words for the first time. For a moment, it was quiet. And for a moment, I thought we'd won. But Vera doesn't lose quietly. She snapped the remote again, flashing more blurry photos, one of me in the yard holding a bowl of food, one of the skunks near a heating pad. "This is unauthorized," she snapped, "and it sets a dangerous precedent." Her voice rose with the desperation of a soap opera villain running out of screen time. "What happens next? Coyotes in the kitchen? Bears in the pool?" It would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. You could almost hear her losing them. One elderly board member cleared his throat and suggested a compromise. "Perhaps I could keep the skunks temporarily, provided there were no further disturbances." I agreed immediately. Vera's lips pressed into a line so thin it could cut diamonds. She banged her gavel, yes, she had a gavel, and adjourned the meeting with the grace of a cruise hip hitting a dock. But her eyes found Rod. And in a voice too low for most to hear, she muttered, "Everyone has a weak spot. I'll find his." And just like that, I knew it wasn't over. You could feel it in the air. The meeting had ended, but Vera hadn't. She didn't just want to win. She wanted submission. Legal permits didn't scare her. Public opinion didn't faze her. What she hated, what drove her absolutely wild, was that she didn't own the narrative anymore. That basement, my permits, the skunks, it was all just surface. What she was really after was control, and the fact that someone in her well-trammed empire had outmaneuvered her, that was unacceptable. So she'd go digging, into Rod, into me, into anything that smelled like vulnerability. And the worst part, I wasn't even angry, I was ready. Because while she was out there hunting for weakness, I had something she didn't. Neighbors waking up, allies with facts, and a family of skunks whose only weapon was scent. But man, what a weapon it was. Turns out Vera wasn't just allergic to wildlife, she was allergic to the truth. I found that out the same way most dangerous truths surface in quiet neighborhoods, over a cup of chai and a heavy silence. Mrs. Hemavarma stopped by my place with a Tupperware of something fragrant and impossible to pronounce, and after one look at the violation notice stapled to my door like a ransom demand, she sat down and said, "It's time you knew what Vera's really doing here." What followed wasn't gossip, it was a guided tour through suburban villainy. According to Mrs. Varma, Vera used to be a mid-level executive at Metronova Developments, a real estate firm infamous for transforming green space into profit. She'd been fired, quietly of course, after a whistleblower exposed her for manipulating environmental reports to fast-track land grabs. And now? Now she was running our HOA like her own mini-regime, not because she loved order, but because she needed leverage. That chilled me more than the skunks ever had. I started connecting dots. Too many families had suddenly moved out over the last 2 years, most citing stress, conflict, or the ever-suspicious change of pace. And those properties? Snapped up by the same development group, Cedar Ridge Holdings. A paper trail led back to a shell company, which, surprise, linked right back to Metronova's financial web. I pulled up a map of Cedar Creek and started highlighting every house sold under duress. They weren't random. They were strategic corner lots, Large backyards, homes adjacent to the wooded buffer zone. It was Monopoly, played in real houses with real heartbreak. And Vera? She wasn't just the banker. She was tipping the board in her favor. That rulebook she enforced like gospel? It wasn't about community standards. It was a tool. And every violation was just another brick in a pressure wall designed to break homeowners into selling. And Rod? Sweet, gullible Rod. The Labrador in loafers following a tiger in heels wasn't as innocent as I thought. My outdoor cameras had picked up more than just Vera's lurking. Rod had been by multiple times, often alone, sometimes at night, sometimes with what looked like measuring tape, a notebook, and once a pair of bolt cutters he quickly tucked away when the neighbor's motion light clicked on. I confronted him casually, under the pretense of asking how his home improvement projects were going. He mumbled something about community beautification, wouldn't meet my eyes, and speed-walked away like a kid who just stole from the candy aisle. I didn't need a confession, I needed proof, and that meant upgrading my security cameras with better night vision, floodlights on motion triggers, and every digital receipt backed up in the cloud, because if Vera was planning to make me her next forced sale, she was going to need more than HOA fines and blurry photos. I compiled everything, sales records, name matches, shell company filings, even quotes from neighbors who'd been encouraged to sell after receiving 10 or more violations in a month. Then I added one more piece of the puzzle, an email accidentally forwarded to a mutual contact of mine in the land conservation group. It was from Vera, sent to an anonymous investor. "The Maddox property has resistance potential," it read, "but I'm working on it. The basement activity should push him over." That was it. No codes, no aliases, just plain, arrogant proof that I'd been targeted not for what I did, but for what my property represented. My house was the last slice of land standing between Cedar Ridge Holdings and a full stretch of developable acreage. I wasn't just the guy with Skunks, I was the final domino. And if Vera wanted me out, she wasn't going to stop at citations. She was going to try something bigger, dirtier, and more desperate. I called Elise. She listened in silence while I laid it all out. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "You realize this means war, right?" I did, but not the kind with raised voices and threats. This was going to be quiet, precise, and legal, because the only thing people like Vera fear more than bad press is documentation. The next HOA meeting was a week away. I planned to attend, smile politely, and drop just enough breadcrumbs to rattle her. But I wasn't going alone. I was gathering allies, neighbors who were tired of the dictatorship with landscaping restrictions, people who'd been bullied, fined, threatened, people who wanted their neighborhood back. The scent of skunks was still in the air, but now it was mixed with something else. Momentum. Because when Goliath builds a fence, David doesn't knock. David gets the blueprints, prints the permits, and shows up with a flash drive and a paper trail. So Vera wasn't just waging a war on wildlife. She was flipping properties like pancakes behind the HOA curtain. And I wasn't just a neighbor with a smelly basement anymore. I was standing between her and a six-figure payoff. But what happens when the trapper becomes the trespasser? Let's just say next time Vera breaks a rule, she'll leave with more than a citation. Hit that subscribe button, because in the next part, things get dark, desperate, and very fragrant. You're not going to want to miss what happens in that basement. Vera wanted evidence? We gave her the deluxe scratch and sniff edition. I wasn't even home when it happened, not physically at least. I was giving a guest lecture at the university on wildlife rehabilitation when my phone buzzed with an alert. Motion detected at the basement door. Vera's plan, as captured in high-definition glory by my security cameras, was simple and stupid. She brought Rod as her lookout. Though calling him that is generous. He stayed across the street with a flashlight and a face full of doubt. Vera, ever the overachiever, came equipped with gloves, a phone camera, and what looked like a bobby pin straight out of a 90s heist movie. It took her 3 attempts, but she got the door open, and the moment she stepped into that dark, musky basement, the countdown to chaos began. I'd prepped for this. Sam and I had rearranged the space just slightly, enough to make it clear someone was trespassing, but not so much that it harmed the animals. The second she crept too close, I remotely turned on the basement lights. Vera jumped like she'd been shot with a taser. Her phone hit the concrete with a satisfying clatter. The noise startled the skunks, who, being nocturnal and on edge from mating season, did what any well-adjusted wild animal would do when cornered by a fluoroprint trespasser. They sprayed. Full force. Direct hit. The scent hit her like garlic napalm wrapped in old gym socks and boiled in regret. She let out a sound I can only describe as a scream trying to put itself back together mid-air. The first spray caught her mid-torso. The second, hit her legs with such precision you'd think Miss Butterstripe had trained with Navy SEALs. Vera stumbled backward, hands flailing like a cartoon villain in a collapsing mine shaft. She tried the door. It was locked. Not maliciously, just a standard feature I'd added after the first break-in attempt. Her scarf, now soaked in skunk oil, offered no protection. Mascara turned into black tear tracks as she pounded on the door, sobbing, shouting for Rod, who remained firmly planted across the street, frozen like a deer watching a fireworks show from a minefield. I watched it all from the university parking lot, one hand over my mouth, the other hitting record on the feed. I wanted to stop her suffering, but I also knew this wasn't just karma. This was court-admissible footage of the world's worst olfactory decision. 15 minutes later, she was curled in the corner of the basement, heaving between dry coughs and muttering curses that were barely words. When I arrived, I called Officer Ray Owens to report the break-in. He arrived with 2 backup officers and a stack of disposable masks. Even through the gear, they gagged. One of them said it smelled like an onion had a nervous breakdown. Vera was escorted out, sobbing, stinking, and still trying to blame me for her trespass. "Set me up," she shrieked, a line made less effective by the fact that she was covered in yellow-tinged skunk spray and dragging one shoe like a ghost in a high school play. She was arrested for criminal trespassing on the spot. And Rod? Rod disappeared the moment the lights hit blue. The next morning, my phone exploded. And not from more HOA fines. For once. The footage went viral. I posted the edited version to my YouTube channel, blurred faces, muted language, nothing illegal, titled it, "HOA President Breaks into Wildlife Rehab Basement, Gets Hit with Nature's Resignation Letter." Within hours, I was trending. Comments poured in. Memes followed. One had Vera's face photoshopped onto a bottle of Febreze. Another said, "Smells like justice." People shared their own HOA horror story. Wildlife pages picked it up. A well-known comedian even retweeted the clip with the caption, "When HOA Karen meets Mother Nature's restraining order." It was poetic justice with a laugh track. From HOA horror to National Geographic hero in one well-angled skunk spray. And while Vera sat in a holding cell smelling like scorched rubber and burned garlic bread, I was answering emails from news outlets asking if I'd do interview. I said yes, but only after I took a long shower and let the skunks have a nice, quiet night. But of course that wasn't the end. Not with Vera. Because after she posted bail and was released back into the same neighborhood she tried to conquer with passive aggression and printed bylaws, she wasn't greeted with sympathy. She was greeted with distance. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw her. HOA meetings had to move online because no one could stomach the lingering cloud that followed her like a personal storm front. Even Rod started ghosting her, realizing he'd hitched his wagon to a sunken ship that smelled like pest control and humiliation. But the real fallout? That was still ahead. Because viral fame is funny like that. It doesn't just expose your worst moment. It digs. And someone, somewhere, was about to dig deeper into Vera's HOA records, property sales, and the real reason why so many families had quietly disappeared from Cedar Creek. And me? I was about to help. Nothing smells sweeter than justice, unless it's justice with fur. 2 weeks after Vera's skunk-soaked basement break-in, things started to unravel for her faster than a roll of toilet paper in a raccoon cage. And the one who pulled the first thread? Gordon Miles, retired corporate attorney, HOA member emeritus, and former Vera ally. Gordon was the type who trimmed his hedges with a level and wore cufflinks to Zoom calls. No one expected him to turn on Vera, least of all Vera herself, but at the next virtual HOA meeting, held online because no one wanted to inhale the Yoda skunk she still carried, Gordon requested the floor. "I've always supported the preservation of community standards," he began, "but I won't support corruption disguised as leadership." Then he shared his screen, and the neighborhood leaned in. What he revealed was a series of emails between Vera and Cedar Ridge Holdings, the same shell company tangled development firm I'd traced earlier. The emails outlined everything: her plan to pressure non-compliant residents into selling, the staged violations, and even kickback percentages. "The Maddox property is key," one email read. "He's stubborn, but if the smell gets worse, the board may be forced to act." The room went quiet. Well, as quiet as a virtual meeting full of retirees and PTA veterans can get. One neighbor gasped so loud it echoed through my laptop speakers. Another typed OMG into the chat 7 times. Vera sat there, frozen, eyes wide, lips tight, as if she was waiting for the screen to glitch and erase it all. But the truth was too pungent to ignore. Her legacy, like a bad smell, lingered, then faded. Officer Ray Owens, who'd joined the meeting to give an update on the trespassing case, unmuted with the most polite voice I've ever heard someone use to ruin another person's evening. "Based on this new evidence," he said, "we're expanding the investigation into potential real estate fraud and breach of fiduciary duty." Someone off-camera clapped. Vera, finally realizing her HOA throne was cracking beneath her, announced her resignation mid-meeting with the dignity of a soap opera character writing her final line. The chat exploded with emojis. Mrs. Varma was unanimously elected as interim HOA president. And just like that, the dictatorship with landscaping restrictions became a democracy with birdseed and blooming native flowers. Vera's final Zoom expression before she logged off was the digital equivalent of a skunk realizing it just walked into its own trap. But the wildest thing? Rod came back. Not to spy, not to grovel, to help. He showed up one Saturday morning while I was installing new nesting boxes in the community garden, an initiative Mrs. Varma championed as one of her first acts. Rod looked sheepish, holding a bag of mulch like it was an olive branch wrapped in compost. "I didn't know," he said. "I thought she just wanted things neat." I didn't know it was about money, and I believed him. Because guilt has a scent too, and his was real. Over the next few weeks, Rod went from HOA henchman to habitat hero. He helped build a bat tower, handed out pamphlets on native pollinators, and even hosted a Learn Your Local Wildlife workshop where he pronounced opossum wrong, but tried so hard nobody corrected him. Redemption, like compost, takes time, but it grows things. And as for the skunks, Miss Butterstripe and her now fluffy, fully rehabbed babies were ready for release. Elise and I planned a small, socially distanced event with a few neighbors, kids included, to celebrate. We walked to the edge of the nearby preserve, lifted the enclosure doors, and watched them toddle out like a freedom parade with fluffy tails. One of the babies paused, looked back, and I swear winked. We named her Little Vera, because irony, like revenge, is best served with a little tail flick. My channel crossed the 1 million subscriber mark that same week. Sponsors called, a small film crew pitched a mini-series, but what mattered most wasn't the views, it was the view out my own window. A community that once felt like a HOA trap now felt like home. And every so often, when the wind's just right, I catch the faintest whiff of skunk. And I smile. Because some scents, like justice, take a while to settle in. And that's how it ended. Not with shouting, not with lawsuits, but with one last skunk waddling into the woods while the woman who once ruled the block with citations and spray tans packed up her SUV and drove off smelling like her own downfall. For me, Reed Maddox, this wasn't just a story about skunks and fines. It was a story about standing your ground, quietly, legally, and with dignity. Even when someone's trying to bulldoze your life with bureaucracy, it's about how one bad apple with a rulebook can rot a whole tree, but one good neighbor with a spine and a camera can stop the rot in its tracks. This whole mess taught me that power doesn't always come from titles or gavels or laminated handbooks. Sometimes it comes from the folks who plant flowers, care for the wounded, and aren't afraid to smell a little funky while doing the right thing. We didn't just get rid of Vera, we reclaimed our neighborhood. And in doing so, we reminded each other what community's supposed to be, a place where people feel safe, heard, and maybe even a little wilder in all the right ways. So if you ever find yourself up against a self-appointed HOA dictator, just remember, paper can't beat principle, and a skunk in mating season is stronger than any power trip on two legs. Stand your ground, know your rights, and if you're lucky, have a backup plan that includes fur and pheromones. If this story made you laugh, made you think, or made you look twice at your neighborhood garden gnome, do me a favor, hit that like button. Drop a comment below and tell me your wildest HOA experience, or just say hi. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Because trust me, the next story, it makes this one smell like roses.